The cold outside felt alive that night, pressing its icy fingers against the glass walls of the luxury restaurant as if it wanted to remind everyone inside how harsh the world could be. Warm lights reflected off polished floors, expensive laughter floated in the air, and plates of food worth more than a week's rent arrived without delay. At a table near the window sat Victor Hale, a man whose success story was admired by millions. He had built his empire from nothing, yet now, surrounded by comfort, he felt strangely empty. Victor lifted his glass, then set it back down untouched. Something inside him felt restless, unsettled, as if the wealth around him had suddenly lost its meaning. That was when the doors slowly opened. A hush crept across the room. A small girl stood at the entrance, barely noticeable at first, thin, soaked from the rain, her coat far too big and worn thin at the elbows. Her hair clung to her face, and her shoes looked as if they had walked too many miles for such small feet. She hesitated, scanning the room filled with people who refused to look back. With timid steps, she approached a waiter, her hands shaking as she spoke in a barely audible voice. "Sir, please? I'm very hungry." Time seemed to pause. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks froze in the air. Some faces turned away in discomfort, others stared with quiet judgment. The waiter hesitated, unsure, glancing toward the staff as if hoping someone else would handle it. Before anyone could respond, a firm hand gripped the child's arm. A security guard moved in quickly, his expression hard. "You don't belong here," he said, pulling her toward the door. The girl stumbled, fear flashing across her face as tears welled in her eyes. Her small voice trembled as she tried to speak, but the words never came. That was when Victor stood up so suddenly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His heart pounded, not from thought but from instinct. "Stop," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. Every eye turned toward him as he took one step forward and spoke words that would change every life in that room forever. The room felt frozen, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Victor didn't fully understand why he had spoken, only that something deep inside him refused to stay silent. His voice echoed again, stronger now, steadier, filled with a conviction that surprised even him. "Let her go. She's with me." The guard hesitated, confused by the sudden authority in Victor's tone. Slowly the grip loosened. The girl stood there trembling, her eyes wide, unsure whether this moment was salvation or another disappointment. Victor stepped closer and, without planning it, said the words that stunned everyone within earshot. "She's my daughter." A ripple moved through the room, whispers, gasps, disbelief. The guard stepped back at once, apologizing under his breath, while the manager rushed forward, his polite smile strained with shock. Victor felt his pulse racing. He had no idea why he said it, only that in that instant, the lie felt like the truest thing he had ever spoken. The girl looked up at him, confusion written all over her small face. Her cheeks were wet, her lips pale. I don't have a father," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The word struck Victor deeply, settling somewhere he hadn't known was empty. He knelt slightly so they were eye level. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lily," she replied, her voice fragile, like it might disappear if spoken too loudly. The manager cleared his throat, glancing nervously around the room. "Perhaps this situation would be better handled privately," he suggested. The stares had grown heavier, the whispers louder. Victor knew what the manager meant. Reputation. Appearances. The comfortable illusion this place thrived on. Victor straightened and met the manager's gaze. "No," he said calmly. "She stays." He pulled out a chair beside his own and gestured for Lily to sit. She hesitated, then climbed onto the chair, her feet dangling far from the floor. The menu placed in front of her looked like a foreign object. "I can't read," she admitted softly, eyes lowered. Victor swallowed hard. In a room filled with abundance, a child sat hungry, ashamed of something she never chose. In that moment he realized this wasn't just about a meal or a mistake spoken aloud. Something irreversible had begun, and there was no turning back now. Victor picked up the menu, though he already knew what he wanted to order. He glanced at Lily, noticing how she kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if afraid of touching anything that didn't belong to her. "I'll choose," he said softly. "Something warm first." When the food arrived, the aroma alone made Lily's eyes widen. Steam curled gently from the bowl as if inviting her closer. She waited, though, watching Victor for permission. Only when he nodded did she lift the spoon with both hands. The first taste made her pause. She closed her eyes, and for a second the noise of the restaurant faded away. Then her shoulders began to shake. Victor leaned forward, alarmed. "Is it not right?" She shook her head quickly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It's perfect," she whispered. I forgot what warm food feels like." Those words pierced him deeper than any accusation ever could. He waited until she had eaten a little more before asking carefully, "When was the last time you ate, Lily?" She thought for a moment. 2 nights ago. A lady gave me some bread." Victor felt his chest tighten. 2 nights. He looked around the restaurant, at the abundance, the waste, the comfort, and suddenly none of it felt impressive. "Where do you sleep?" he asked gently. "Where it's quiet," she said. "Sometimes near the old church. Sometimes on the bus benches when it's raining." As she spoke, Victor began to notice small details. The way she flinched when someone walked too close, how she ate slowly as if unsure the food wouldn't vanish. She carried herself like someone who had learned not to expect kindness. A memory surfaced, his own childhood, nights spent listening to his mother whisper promises she couldn't always keep. He had escaped that life, built something solid and powerful, but in doing so, he had buried the part of himself that once needed help too. When Lily finally looked up, their eyes met. In hers, Victor didn't see pity or demand. He saw resilience, quiet strength, and something else, hope, fragile but still alive. In that moment, Victor understood this encounter wasn't random. The lie he had spoken earlier had opened a door, and behind it stood a choice that would test who he truly was. The attention in the room slowly returned to murmurs, but Victor felt as if the world had narrowed to just the small girl beside him. When Lily finished the last spoonful, she sat back, placing the bowl carefully at the center of the table, as if afraid someone might scold her for doing it wrong. Victor smiled gently, though his mind was racing with questions he wasn't ready to ask out loud. The manager returned, this time with a practiced calm. "Sir," he said quietly, "people are asking questions." Victor met his gaze. "Let them," he replied. He reached for his phone, hesitated, then slipped it back into his pocket. For the first time in years, he didn't want a call, a solution, or a strategy. He wanted to listen. "Lily," he said softly, "how long have you been on your own?" She shrugged, a gesture far too mature for her age. "Since my mom got sick. She said she'd come back after she rested. She didn't." Her voice wasn't bitter, just tired. Victor felt a heavy pressure behind his eyes. He had closed million-dollar deals without hesitation, but this simple truth left him speechless. "Did anyone help you?" "Sometimes," Lily said. "But people get busy." Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows, echoing the quiet that settled between them. Victor realized he was standing at the edge of a decision that would reshape everything. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a public gesture. This was responsibility. He signaled for dessert, something warm and sweet. Lily watched in disbelief as it arrived. "Is this for me too?" "For you," he nodded. She smiled then, not a polite smile but a real one that lit up her face. Victor felt something shift inside him, something long forgotten awakening. When she laughed softly at the first bite, he understood the truth he had been avoiding. Success meant nothing if it couldn't protect the vulnerable. And in that moment, Victor knew walking away was no longer an option, even if staying meant facing consequences he could not yet imagine. The bill arrived quietly, but Victor barely glanced at it. Numbers had never scared him. What unsettled him now was the thought of what would happen once they walked outside. Lily swung her legs gently under the table, her expression peaceful for the first time that night, unaware of the storm of decisions forming in his mind. When he stood and offered her his coat, she hesitated. "But then you'll be cold," she said. Victor smiled. "I'll be fine." As they moved toward the exit together, the room watched again, this time with uncertainty instead of judgment. The guard stepped aside, avoiding Victor's eyes. The door opened and the cold rushed in, sharp and real. Lily clutched the coat tightly around herself, breathing in its warmth as if it were a shield. Outside, the city felt louder, harsher. Cars splashed through puddles and neon lights reflected on wet pavement. Lily instinctively stepped closer to Victor. He noticed without comment, slowing his pace to match her short strides. "Where would you go tonight?" he asked gently. She pointed vaguely down the street. "I find a quiet place." Victor stopped. The simplicity of her answer made the weight of reality undeniable. He thought of his empty penthouse, rooms filled with silence, and the life he had built to avoid feeling anything too deeply. "Not tonight," he said. "You're coming with me." Lily looked up, uncertain. "I don't want to be trouble." "You're not," he replied firmly. In that moment, Victor realized how easy it was to turn away, and how powerful it was to stay. He wasn't rescuing her to feel important. He was choosing to be present, to step into responsibility instead of comfort. As they walked toward his car, Victor felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Fear, yes, but also purpose. Whatever tomorrow brought, he knew one thing with certainty. This night had changed him. And for the first time, his success felt like it might finally mean something. The city lights blurred past the car windows as Victor drove, the rhythmic sound of rain filling the silence. Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded over his coat, her breathing slow and steady. Every few seconds, she glanced at him as if checking whether this kindness was real or something that might vanish without warning. Victor felt that look more strongly than any contract he had ever signed. When they arrived at the building, Lily stared upward in disbelief. The height, the lights, the quiet security at the entrance, it all felt like another world. Inside, the elevator ride seemed endless. She traced the numbers with her finger as they climbed higher, her eyes wide with wonder. The door opened to a space filled with warmth and soft light. Lily stepped in carefully, removing her shoes without being asked. Victor noticed how instinctively she tried to make herself small. "You're safe here," he said gently. He prepared a simple bed on the couch, handing her a glass of warm milk. She sipped it slowly, then looked up at him. "Will I have to leave tomorrow?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Victor sat beside her, the weight of the question pressing heavily on his heart. He had spent years avoiding attachment, believing independence was strength. But now he understood something deeper. True strength was choosing to stay. "No," he said softly. "Tomorrow we start figuring things out together." Lily smiled, a quiet, hopeful smile that carried more power than applause or praise ever could. As she drifted to sleep, Victor stood by the window watching the rain fade into mist. For the first time in his life, his future wasn't measured in numbers or titles, but in the promise he had made to a child who had reminded him what it truly meant to be human.